Okay, here we go on chapter 9 on emotion. So let's pick up on number 11. The three components of emotion according to Nozick are stated pretty clearly at the bottom of page 87. That would be a belief, an evaluation, and a feeling. The important part of this is to see that the feeling component of an emotion is just one of three components. A state of emotion, according to Nozick, is the triple of belief, evaluation, and feeling, where the belief and the evaluation are every bit as much a part of the emotion as the feeling is. So according to Nozick and the others he mentions in the footnote, an emotion is more than a feeling, and it's simply a mistake to say that emotion is just is a feeling. He says that's wrong. And I think the arguments that he gives on page 88 more or less prove that, or at least they come close to a proof that an emotion is more than a feeling. And in particular, they show how important the belief and evaluation component are. That really gets us to question 12. Nozick is trying to prove that the belief and the emotion and the evaluation component of pride, for example, are necessary components of it, to the extent that you simply cannot have the emotion pride unless you have very specific beliefs and values. Even if you say that you're proud, you're simply wrong if you fail to have the beliefs and evaluations that are described there. At least so much he's arguing. So, yeah, there you go. That also leads, really from the very definition of an emotion, to identifying three ways in which an emotion can be defective. That might sound kind of harsh, or perhaps a little nicer way to put it would be inappropriate or somehow wrong, an improper emotion. So those three ways would be if the belief is false, the evaluation is either false or wrong, he says, or the feeling is disproportionate to the evaluation. And to see how each of those would work, you can refer back to the pride example to see what happens when we look at a emotion of pride, but where the belief component is false. It's a defective emotional state. So those are the three ways in which emotion can go wrong, so to speak, and that underscores the fact that we can be evaluated on our emotions. Our emotions are every bit subject to a scrutiny and criticism as any other part of our life. And we can go wrong when it comes to emotions and be properly blamed for having inappropriate emotions. So much Nozick is arguing. I, for one, happen to agree with him. On the happier side, we've got question number 14. Of course, that corresponds to this three ways in which an emotion can be fitting, or the conditions under which an emotion is fitting, and that would be the flip side of the unfitting emotion. So the fitting emotion is when we've got an emotion where the belief is true, the evaluation is correct, and the feeling is proportionate to the evaluation. And Nozick goes on to discuss this a little bit further on 89 and 90, should you like to see a little bit more of the details. In particular, there might be some questions raised as to, well, how do we really say when an evaluation is correct or the value component of an emotion is incorrect? How do we make those judgments? And isn't that just relative and kind of not an objective issue? He does get into that, and actually he revises it a little bit, which I think makes his account much better. If you look at the revisions he includes on 89. Okay. So let us then take a look at number 15. What is the Spock problem? The Spock problem is introduced on page 90. If you look in the parentheses at the bottom paragraph, he raises the question, why are emotions important above and beyond correct evaluations? He says, call this the Spock problem. So the idea here is that we've got this character Spock, and presumably you've at least heard of, if not seen, Star Trek, and you're familiar with this guy Spock. What we know about Spock, or at least the Spock that Nozick needs to refer to in this book, which may or may not correspond to the television character Spock. The Trekkies out there might take issue with this. But anyway, the kind of character we're talking about here is a guy that lacks emotion, but he does have correct beliefs and correct evaluations. He just doesn't have any feelings that go along with these beliefs and evaluations. So that means he doesn't have any emotional feelings. He does, however, make correct judgments, perhaps about what the world is like. He might make correct evaluations about the goals that he should direct his life toward. But he does all of this in an unfeeling, unemotional way. The question there is, what of any value is this person missing, given that they have correct beliefs about the world and they have correct evaluations about how they ought to live? Are they really missing out just because they don't have any emotions that go along with these? So that's the problem, so to speak, is just to identify what it is that would be missing from that Spock-like life that is of any value. So Nozick goes on to give his answer to that problem, and this is what 17 is getting at. And if you look at pages 91 really through the end of the chapter, Nozick makes a number of points about how having emotional feelings that grow out of our beliefs and values more closely link us and more deeply immerse us in the world of our own values. We actually internally represent values like justice, equality, care, love, all of those things that we might care about out there in the world get internalized, and Nozick actually says these values create an internal replica of themselves inside of us when we respond emotionally to situations. And that doesn't happen in the case of Spock, who merely responds with his abstract thinking or his mind and has beliefs and evaluations. He doesn't get that internal replica of the value where he is directly connected internally at the level of feeling and experientially to what he values. He simply abstractly judges about values. And that's to have a weaker and more superficial immersion in the world of value. Now this raises other questions as to well, is that really necessarily better to have that deeper immersion in value, especially when we look at negative emotions? If you look at the chapter, that discussion kind of goes on. Let me back up actually one moment here to look at the Spock problem itself. It's very important in formulating this problem properly to see that Spock can have pleasure. It's wrong to formulate the Spock problem in such a way as saying that there's this guy with true beliefs, correct evaluations, but no feelings. That's not the point. If you look at it closely, Spock can have plenty of feelings, like bathing in the sun and enjoying that warmth of the sun on his skin. He can feel that because that's not an emotional feeling. What he can't have are emotional feelings. And those are a specific kind of feelings, ones that grow out of our beliefs and evaluations. There are straightforward physiological responses of feeling, pain and pleasure, that Spock can have. So that's just one important point. Okay, it's kind of wrapping it up here. We look at number 18. What we've got here, how do you interpret Nozick's remark that intense and fitting emotions make us more? I'm just going to leave that to you. I guess what I would ask is, well, more what? And looking at his chapter on emotion, perhaps we're in a position to say what that more would be. Okay, thank you.